Les Johnson is the former Chief Technology Officer at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center and a veteran space technologist with a 40-year career in aerospace. He spent 35 years at NASA leading advanced space science and in space propulsion projects, and before that, worked on missile defense systems. He is also the author of numerous science fiction books. Les, when you were in college, is this what you saw yourself doing?
In a vague sort of way. I really decided when I was at 12 that I wanted to work for NASA. And I really had this single minded focus from that point forward to do that. And that's what led me to choose a career in physics and go the path that I went on. And it's really funny. I just went to my 45th high school reunion and everybody there said, "We knew this is what you'd be doing." So I think it's where I was meant to be.
Very nice. So tell me a little bit about your time at NASA and what exactly did you do at the Marshall Space Flight Center?
Well, first off, it's been a wonderful career. You mentioned the 40 years. It's hard for me to believe it's been 40 years. It just seems like yesterday to me. That's because I really don't believe I ever worked a day because I was enjoying everything I was doing, and that adage that people tell you, if you enjoy what you're doing, you never work a day in your life. And I worked really hard, but enjoyed all of it. Well, really, it varied. Toward the end of my career, as I had some experience taking technologies from idea through technology development to building flight systems and actually putting them on the pad and launching them, I was chosen to be the chief technology officer for the center. And what that meant was I would report primarily to the deputy center director and all matters of technology, the next generation systems that we were developing at Marshall that won't fly in the next couple of years, but will fly in the next decade. So it was really trying to advance improvements in propulsion, life support, material science, power, the whole gamut of things.
What was the most interesting thing you worked on there when you look back? The thing you were most passionate about?
Oh, it had to be, most people aren't aware of this, but light has momentum. Now, it doesn't have any rest mass, but light does have momentum. And what that means is all those little particles of light that you call photons, as they reflect from you or anything else, they're pushing on you. It's just like when you're outside and the wind is blowing,
They
you
interact
have
with
your
matter.
hand out,
Yeah.
the force, you're feeling the air reflect from your hand and it exerts a force. But the force exerted by light is very, very small, extremely small. If you were to go out on a clear, sunny day, and it's the middle of the summer and there's low humidity and the sun's directly overhead, the amount of force on 2 football fields of area would be the same force you'd feel as a quarter and a penny in your hand due to gravity. But it's a constant force. And what that means is you get a constant acceleration. And so if you go into space and you deploy a large, very large, like thousands of square feet in area, lightweight, they're about 2.5 microns thick, about the thickness of a hair, reflective material, and it looks just like a sail on a sailboat, it will be pushed by sunlight. And if you
Uh-huh.
attach a small spacecraft to it, it'll cause that spacecraft to move. And the really neat thing about this is it doesn't require any fuel. And when you're in space away from the Earth, the sunlight is constant. So it's always pushing on you. And over about a year, you can get more propulsion from this system than you can just about any rocket because rockets will run out of fuel very quickly.
Yeah.
And so a solar sail can be used to do all kinds of innovative science missions. And ultimately, and you mentioned when I was back in high school and college, ultimately it might carry our first robotic probe to another star.
I love that you said robotic probe because my next question was, even if we do find a way to get to our closest planetary system like Alpha Centauri, 4.5 light years away, we travel 80% the speed of light. Let's just say that's the case. The bottleneck is not technology. It's going to be us. Even going somewhere as close as Mars, you don't look for the epitome of intellectual scientist here on Earth. You look for almost precisely the exact opposite. Someone who is a loner, someone who has no social skills, someone who can be alone, someone who won't get depressed. And think of just going to even outside our solar system. Humans seem to be the biggest bottleneck for interplanetary space travel. How do we reconcile that?
Well, you call it a bottleneck, I call it a challenge.
Fair enough.
So I try to look at the glass as being half full. No, you are correct in that we're a big ball, we're a wad of water essentially that has a lot of requirements to keep us alive. But I don't think there's any substitute for a human presence to do the things that we want to do anywhere and on space. I mean, I can't imagine. Would you be happy if you're told your next vacation to wherever, instead of going, somebody's just going to film it, you show it on a screen, and you sit at home and watch it? I think the answer is no. You want to go,
Yeah,
right?
I
And
do.
and it's hard for us to send people to space. It's extremely difficult, but we want to go.
Yeah.
So I think for an interstellar voyage, that is so far in the future with people, that I don't even want to speculate when that would be because it's so much harder. But a robotic probe, I don't know. I think if we keep moving at the pace we're going, we could probably get that 80% the speed of light and send something there within the next 100 years. I really believe that.
Do you think we're more likely to destroy ourselves here on Earth before we develop the technology to spread out? I mean, the conversation of a nuclear winter is one that might be here for a long time, and our ability to become an interplanetary species might be quite a few years ahead. How do we navigate that where we've got so many problems here on Earth? Are we really able to weather out the process to where we actually leave Earth?
Well, I guess I'll just give a personal story. I was a year old in my mother's arms when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, and the world was on the verge of a nuclear war. Everybody thought that was going to happen. But my dad went to work. My mom fed me, got me ready to play with what other 1-year olds in the neighborhood, and life went on. And I think that we are in a challenging time, but I think we also need to have perspective. And again, I'll harken back to my parents. My father, this is going to make me seem really old. Sorry for your listeners. My dad was born in 1919. My mother in 1921. They were a part of the greatest generation. They grew up in the Great Depression, fought World War II, defeated the Nazis and the Imperial Japanese, engaged and stood up to communism in the Cold War, and watched people land on the moon. And my dad started in a house that had a dirt floor and he worked with a horse. Okay. If they can overcome that and all the challenges that faced humanity in that era, we can overcome the challenges we have today. So, yes, that is always a risk of a nuclear war, a bioengineered virus, all those things are possible. But I think we just have to keep our eyes on the goal, try to improve life on Earth for everybody as we can, and make tomorrow as better for our grandchildren as my parents made it for my children. And I just firmly believe that.
We're slightly off topic, but if you had to pick one of these bodies, Mars, Europa, Enceladus, or Titan, what would be on your mind to harbor human life?
Wow, to send people or to live there?
Well, I guess if you were to make a calculation for the project that whole, where you're weighing, our ability to get there with the probability of it being able to harbor human life. If you had to pick a project saying, we want to leave planet Earth, what would be the first thing on your mind? An interstellar kind of scenario.
Okay. Well, I have to burst a bubble here though. The likelihood of finding Earth 2.0 is essentially zero. Of finding another planet
Mm.
just like Earth that's suitable for us to basically take off our shirts and go outside and walk around is essentially zero, right? So no matter where we go, we're either going to have to live in something until we can terraform or change the place we're going to be acceptable to
Mm.
human life, or we have to figure out how to survive there. So, given the choices you've given me, I would say Mars, hands down. I think it'll be very hard, but a lot easier than the other destinations. Yep, hands
That's an
down.
interesting answer. So you are dealing with flight propulsion systems, and I kind of want to talk a little bit more about that. Where do you see the technology heading for us to start moving to different planets or traveling deeper into space? You nailed it spot on. These just the weight of these propulsion systems. The more fuel you put on these systems, the more energy you need to move them. We need something novel to really start getting farther and farther into space.
Well, I think that the next logical step for propulsion for people is something we should have continued that we started back in the 1960s, and that's called a nuclear thermal rocket.
Hmm.
We need to harness the power of the atom to heat our propellant to propel our rockets. And the reason for that is it immediately cuts in half the propellant you just mentioned. The nuclear thermal rocket, the way a chemical rocket works is you're making chemical bonds and that releases energy and that heats your propellant to make your rocket exhaust to make you move. Well, a nuclear thermal rocket, you flow your propellant around a hot nuclear reactor to heat it. And you do that twice as efficiently as you do chemical combustion. The same technology that's in nuclear reactors that produce electrical power, that are in university research reactors, believe it or not, on several university campuses, which I still marvel that those are out there. Um, and that they're looking to make mobile nuclear for the DoD now and for some of these data centers. We could adapt those for space and immediately double our fuel economy on our rockets. I think it's a no-brainer. We've got to have it, and it's ideally suited for a Mars mission or missions all the way out to the main belt asteroids. Got to do it.
And we get to Mars. What do you think will be the biggest challenge to sustaining life on the planet? So, if someone were to
Sustaining
go
life.
to Mars, what would be the biggest challenge to sustain life on that planet?
I think protecting them from radiation.
Hmm.
We here on the Earth, we are blessed with a planet that has a very strong magnetic field, which creates this bubble around the planet called the magnetosphere. And the magnetosphere has a lot of trapped charged particles that come in from the solar wind and the sun. And as the charged particles come in and they hit this magnetosphere, it's like a big deflector screen from Star Trek. It bounces most of that radiation off and into deep space, and it doesn't reach the surface of the planet. At Mars, the planet doesn't have that magnetic field. And so it is going to constantly be bombarded by radiation from the sun that can be lethal in the long term without lots and lots of shielding. Now, you can shield from it with like feet of dirt over your habitat, but that'll be the biggest challenge for long term survivability on Mars.
Right.
Um, for short term, it's all the usual stuff, air, water, recycling of all the above, food, that kind of thing. But for long term, I think you could build greenhouses, you could bioengineer some food, you can recycle water, and there's probably water under the ground on Mars, but the radiation will be a big problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's just say we were to find fossilized life on Mars. What do you think the philosophical implications of that would be? How would that change how we view ourselves here on Earth, and how would that change our motivation for space exploration?
Well, I mean, just being blunt, I think the average person would say, "Oh, that was interesting," and they go on with. I think they go on with going to work and going to school.
I agree, because it's so distant from us. Like, we can have a video of an alien breakdancing on Mars, and we'll be like, "Hey, that's cool," and but that has no implication on our life. That's unfortunate.
Well, I think something living dancing on Mars might have a more of an implication than finding some fossil. But I think you're generally right. It's like today we're all hearing about all this breakthrough in AI, right? And all of us who follow tech are just fascinated by that. I go to the grocery store and I'm out and about, and are most people really even giving it a second thought? Not so much. Even
Mm.
though it will dramatically affect their lives, they're just keeping on, right? So I don't know. I think for religion, a lot of religious folks will have to give some thoughts to that. And I'm a Christian, and so I make no bones about that. And I wouldn't be challenged by that because I don't think anywhere in the Bible it says that the earth is the only place God created life. But
Right.
some people might have a problem with that. And some other religions might have a problem with that. But I think it'd be great. I'd love to find evidence that there's been life elsewhere. I think it would be incredibly interesting.
You said that your average person going about their day doesn't necessarily feel the influence of AI. And I wonder why that is, or something deeper at play here. Because if we were to talk about the threats of nuclear war, Cuban Missile Crisis, puts people in panic. But then we see robots at Boston Dynamics doing backflips, and it's almost like we're confused. We're unable to apply the appropriate emotional response to that. Is it cute or is it deathly scary? Many of us are conscious of the threat that AI poses to us. It's not that it'll be malevolent towards us, it's that we'll become obsolete towards it. It's almost like we're designed to still expedite our own inefficiency as quickly as possible. Like, we're always trying to make this iPhone faster, sooner, but we're aware of the threat it poses to us. And, we're talking about interplanetary travel, we're talking about humans, we're talking about robots. And I do wonder if there's a bigger picture here. The role of our collective species is to pass this baton of life from biology to technology. Because If you think of us, we need the temperature in our room to be perfectly right. Everything's got to be 90 degrees and symmetrical. And if you were to put us anywhere else in space, our eyes would immediately explode out of our sockets. And even going to Mars, you'd have to find very unique personalities to be able to weather that trip. Never mind leaving our planetary system. And I wonder if there's a difference here of why threat of AI has a very different response to any other existential threat to the human race.
I think it's because it's a slow catastrophe.
Mm.
It's not like, oh, tomorrow AI is going to take over. You know, the Cuban Missile Crisis was, are we going to end the world in the next 3 days?
Mm.
And I think there was a sense of immediacy to it that got people focused on it. I think the most recent we had with that were the first half year of COVID, maybe. First 2 weeks of COVID, for sure, was very catastrophizing in most people's minds. You know, is this it? Is this the plague that's going to get us all? And it ended up being also a slow motion disaster movie as COVID progressed. And I kind of think AI could be that. I'm not saying it is that. Although I think the marriage of AI with robotics is going to be incredibly disruptive to the labor market.
Yeah.
And I see that all the way up to space development because I'm aware of a company that had their software engineers design the systems that keep a spacecraft stable in space, right? In space, every action has an equal and opposite reaction, so it's real easy to, I'll hold up my popcorn bowl here, to lose control of the spacecraft when you want it to be flying steady, right? And you have little thrusters all over it to steer and all these other things. Well, what this test was is they had all the engineers who've done this for years program the system to maintain its stability when all these forces acted on it to disturb it. And then they took an identical system, and instead of all the software, they put in a machine learning, an AI tool, and said, here are your actuators, figure out how to fly. And it was only a matter of minutes before the machine learning algorithm had learned to fly as well as, you know, decades of experience of these programmers had put into all the software to keep the thing flying. So I think the disruption of jobs is not just going to be at McDonald's, where it's replaced by a kiosk and some automated burger flipper in the back. It's going to go all the way out to people building spaceships.
I couldn't agree more. And I think even more so, it's going to pull at the heartstrings of what we feel our identity is as a human being. You can look at the first LLM, like ChatGPT. If we were to have this conversation 5, 10 years ago of what the first LLM might look like, we would talk about a bunch of scientists poking away at a machine in a sandbox confined environment in some lab, where in reality it was thrown into the wild and we're just all having fun with it. If we were to take that conversation further and talk about what kind of things LLM would be good at or what kind of jobs it might pose a threat towards, we might say lawyers, even maybe doctors, where there's a very structural technical process, not the things that make humans exceptionally unique, perhaps not music or art and whatnot, but I think we're coming to some realization that we're all exceptionally unique, but maybe just a few bytes away from being replaced. And the things that AI is doing really good at is kind of surprising us, where we're seeing videos, we're seeing art, we're even seeing some music, which is quite astonishing. And you have to keep in mind, it's not about where we are now. It's the delta, it's the rate we're changing and where we're heading. And I completely agree with you. I think that we're going to start questioning our motivation. Even if I want to make a startup now, I have this unique idea. In 5 years from now, it's like the weight equation, right? We're sending a rocket ship to Alpha Centauri. The question becomes, do we send it now or do we wait for our technology to become better and then we send it? And it's going to be the same question we have today. Do I invest all this capital now to start a company, or do I wait 3, 4 years at the advancements of AI and my cost will be a half and then I can kind of throw that startup together then? It hurts, that whole risk profit ratio. It is scary. Even me as a programmer, I'm like, should I invest all this time in this project? I might just do it better in a few years from now. So that would be definitely an immediate effect of all this. Pulling this back to NASA for just a moment. You ever heard of the overview phenomenon?
Yeah, I was just going to say the overview effect is something that was really fascinating to me because when that book came out like what 30 years ago or so, and I met the author and he had interviewed all these astronauts and they all had this one common emotional experience when they were in space looking down at the Earth is they didn't see the borders, right? And they got this sense
Mm.
of oneness of the with the planet, of us as all human on this fragile blue marble, and with, you know, that borders were totally artificial, and all the disagreements we have seem so trivial, right? When you're
Yeah.
comparing existence and life on this oasis versus the deadness of space. It was fascinating for me, and I still love thinking about it. I need to reread the book.
But what's your overview effect once you left NASA?
Well, that's a tough one. Well, it lets me, not that NASA was telling me what to do or what to say, but whenever I would be interviewed or talk in public about what we were doing, I had to be careful to not put my personal opinion in when I was speaking for NASA, right? And it was always, I'm telling what we're doing, and even though I might have disagreed fervently with what it was, it's still what we're doing and what I was talking about, and I was speaking as a NASA speaker, so that's what I would talk about. What's been the overview effect for me is being able to not necessarily go in and rip everybody up because I don't that's not my nature, but to be able to be candid about what I think about different things, and usually it's pretty consistent with what's going on because I know a lot of the background, but I just feel like I have this freedom now that when people ask me my opinion, I don't have to say, "I can't give you my opinion because 'cause I'm here speaking for my employer." I can say, "Well, my opinion is this." And the other side of that is, in my consulting business, I started a company called, Infinite Frontiers Consulting. Didn't do any advertising, but I've had multiple startups, people getting VC funding and searching for VC funding, come to me and want me as an advisor to help them make sure that they've got their technical story straight. And that has been loads of fun. I'm just wonderful enjoying that. And I'd like
Yeah.
to think I'm making a difference in that. So it's been good.
Yeah. And just to clarify, I meant once you left NASA, you were doing all these grandiose projects. And now like you're back to the real world. You don't have necessarily the budget where you can or the infrastructure where you can start worrying about like propulsion systems and whatnot.
I thought it would be really hard, but it hasn't been. And the reason it hasn't been is for the very reason I just mentioned, in that there are some really creative people with a lot of creative ideas that I think I can contribute to with my background and experience that I would never have had the opportunity to interact with as a civil servant working for NASA.
Right.
Because these are private companies, these are nonprofits in the space arena, things like the Interstellar Research Group, which I'm an advisor for and one of the founders of trying to foster these kinds of thinking for far term interstellar access, to a group trying to help save the planet through something called a planetary sunshade. And then some of the companies that I can't talk about because I signed an NDA with them. But for me, it's a different kind of excitement, but it's every bit as exciting as when I was on the other side. I haven't felt that remorse.
Not many people get to work on such incredible projects as you have. The high stakes, the constant pressure of having these incredible projects with so much on the line, that must carve your personality and your risk-taking capacity. How is that transferred into your day-to-day life or your endeavors today?
Well, I think you mentioned it earlier, my half full personality and the whole notion of we're not a problem for spaceflight, we're a challenge. Um, I think in my personal life, I think my family, my adult children would agree that it's just me. That it's really hard to distinguish the person I was at NASA from the person I am at home and in our personal life. We love to travel. I'm writing books. We're not afraid to go do new things and go places we've never been before. I love meeting new people and hearing new ideas. So I don't know. I don't know how to best answer your question. That's the only answer I can probably give.
That's incredible. So it's ask tell me a little bit more about what you're doing today, and do you have, like, a 5 to 10-year plan for yourself?
Sure. What I'm doing today is I just finished the manuscript for my next popular science nonfiction book that's going into Princeton Press for publication next year. And it's all about how space technology can help solve energy and environment problems here on Earth. Some of the things you're worried about
Right.
from our earlier conversation, the whole probably the climate change thing, the power and resources and environment, and there's a lot space can do to help solve those problems. I also just got notice today that my science fiction publisher has accepted a proposal for another series of novels that I'm going to write. And then I'm just really pumped about some of the clients I have for their space startups. one of which wants me to be on board with equity in the company as being an advisor to their chief technology officer. I've never done that kind of thing before, so I'm pretty pumped about that. So, all of the above. I think if I'm not careful, I'll be doing more work now than I did when I was at NASA. And that's okay.
How is it like being a writer of fiction and nonfiction? It's not common that I find an author who does both.
It's a different part of your brain, and it's even worse than that because I write science fiction or science, which means it has to be understandable to my parents who were not scientists, right? I have to write it for a general audience. And then I also write peer-reviewed journal articles, um, which has to be original research and very technical. I've never had a problem really switching between those worlds. I've been blessed not only with a talent for mathematics, but I had a liberal arts education. I'm probably the only NASA chief technology officer who had a BA before he went and got a master's or a PhD in physics. So I have a classical liberal arts degree, studied philosophy, sociology, psychology, literature, the whole gamut of
It's
things when
very
I was in
interesting.
college and loved it.
What's the saying? Sometimes science is more art than science. And perhaps like getting an artistic background gives you some sort of unique edge in an ecosystem of everyone who's purely technical.
Well, I will tell you it did. And I can give instances of where, and before I became chief technology officer, obviously I had a career. I had to earn that position with doing things. And I ended up writing a lot of proposals and making a lot of presentations to get funding for my projects. And I can tell you completely honestly, I didn't always have the best technical idea, but I often beat the people who did because they weren't very good communicators. They didn't know how to explain what they were doing and why it was important. And over my career and with some intuition I've gained, I don't know if you've ever read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink. I'll
I have
give a
not, no.
commercial for another writer. Yeah. Well, basically, he describes a phenomenon where people who have a lot of experience in their field can instantly look at a problem and have an idea of how to solve it without having to do the analytical approach of, making lists and all these options and trades. And they get that from years of experience. I kind of have that blink ability for explaining technical things to a non-technical audience. Once I understand it, the translation, I'm able to do it. And that has won me many a project and funding that were probably not as deserved as somebody else, but they couldn't communicate it to the decision makers.
How would you explain some of the most esoteric stuff in physics to someone who's a non-physics enthusiast, something like quantum mechanics?
Well, that would take a far longer time than we have right here. Quantum mechanics, quite honestly, is one of those things that I've talked to people who make their career working on that and are theorists, right? Quantum mechanics, string theory, and other things.
Yeah,
And they will be the first to tell you that to try to take what's going on in that realm and explain it in a way that we can relate to in our macroscopic lives is often impossible to directly translate because it's oftentimes so counterintuitive. And so I
yeah,
think the hardest part of explaining quantum mechanics is to explain to people that at the underlying level of reality, at the atomic and subatomic level, outcomes are not always certain. It's all a probabilities game. And I think people find that philosophically unsettling.
yeah.
We're used to cause and effect, and in some realms of the very, very small, cause and effect doesn't necessarily apply, and that's difficult to understand.
Yeah, we have a certain way of how we expect the world to be. We think it's magical when it operates differently, but there's nothing about quantum mechanics that needs to appeal to our feelings. That's just how reality is at that scale. And I always wonder why there are certain behaviors, but then you go to a different scale, like general relativity, and things are so vastly different. And where these two fields collide, like black holes, where you've got a ton of mass packed into tiny areas, where we have the biggest mystery in physics. And this has always been a fascinating conversation of mine, is the theory of everything, quantum gravity, reconciling quantum mechanics with relativity. I wonder if this has been any sort of passion of yours, and do you have any philosophical way of wrapping your head around all this?
I have to say that I'm giving an opinion in this area, not as someone who is working in the discipline. I'm more of a technologist than a theoretical physicist, but I do interact with that world frequently, both the scientists I work with and in the reading and keeping up in the journals and such. And I think you might be making a philosophical mistake in assuming that there is a single grand unified theory of everything.
It seems parsimonious. It only makes sense that there should be a way. It's almost like you pass the Rubicon when you enter a black hole. There is no way for information to leave it. Putting Hawking radiation aside for just a moment. So you're right to make the point that there might not need to be a theory in these sort of places because maybe it's like a punch out of reality where nothing really exists. But at the other end of the spectrum, there's a place where gravity plays a visible role in the quantum realm, and there must be a way to explain it.
There must be a way to explain the interaction or the interface between the two, but I'm not sure we necessarily have to have one grand theory from which
Hmm.
everything else flows. And Sabine Hofstetter is one of my heroes. She wrote a book called Lost in the Math. It's all about string theory, and it got me to thinking about this notion of why we assume there has to be a grand theory of everything. And it's really logical to assume because as we've studied the universe, it's pretty much collapsed to three fundamental things, right? And now we're down to two, quantum mechanics and gravity, because electromagnetism has been united with the weak nuclear force and all these other things that we used to think of as, separate and distinct forces have slowly, congealed into the two that we're left with, which is the quantum reality and the Einsteinian general relativistic reality. But I have to tell you, most people assume it's going to be Einstein that's wrong. And every time I read a headline or see an article or a journal article where the headline is Einstein proven right again, I chuckle because I think that a lot of people are setting out to find a regime where Einstein's theory breaks down because they think it'll lead them to this grand unification with quantum mechanics. And I'm not so certain.
Wow,
So
it's an interesting
anyway,
answer. I'm really happy I pulled you into this direction because that's an interesting perspective. I always assume like there must be a theory of everything. It's parsimonious, and maybe that's just an incorrect way to even look at the problem.
well, I'm not saying there isn't one. I just don't
Yeah,
know that it's safe for us to assume there must be one. Yeah.
right. People have died trying to figure it out. We talked about the books you're working on, and if I were to speak to Les in 10 years from now, what might he be working on?
Wow, 10 years from now, I'm gonna be wow, I don't even wanna think about how old I'll be in 10 years. What I'll be working on, I think I will have slowed down a bit. I don't know that
Hmm.
I wanna keep up this pace forever, but I think I'll still be involved. I'll probably still be involved in the interstellar research community because that has been my passion since I discovered science fiction when I was in elementary school. Um, so I'll probably be still involved there. I don't know if I'll still be writing. I'll still be out and about, going to conferences, meeting people, and I'll tell you, I won't be hanging around with my age peers. I find almost nothing more depressing than hanging around people who are of my retirement age because I don't seem to have a lot in common with them. I enjoy talking to the 40 somethings
Hmm.
and the 30 somethings because they're still full of energy and have these big plans for the future. And I love that energy.
I like
So
that, and I feel that with you. I feel like I can sit down and talk to you forever.
well, I appreciate that. Thank you. But I just don't, I can't stand spending too much time with people my age.
Yeah. I have another macro bird's eye view question for you. We talked about AI, and I want to talk about quantum computing for just a second, and I want to talk about blockchain. So I
Sure.
look at this as a three-pronged revolution at our doorstep. Each in and of themselves is greatly going to make life unrecognizable to us in the future. Together, it's really hard to imagine. Our predictive power is truly fleeting, and even if we're operating under like technological metrics like Moore's law, we're really breaking down. I mean, I'm wondering, with the assumption that generalized artificial artificial intelligence is not too far away. We achieve quantum supremacy where our quantum computers, our qubits can start doing stuff better than a classical computer can. And blockchain really does permeate itself through all our technologies and our ability to use systems that are just elegant, that are robust, decentralized structures takes over. I mean, what does the future look like to you 10 years from now? We're talking about like the threat towards jobs, but the implications are just way more than that.
I think that'll be the one that most of society feels, though, is the displacement of labor. I really think people will feel that a
Mm,
lot. But I think there's a real threat from the whole quantum supremacy, and it could be a threat to the blockchain you mentioned, right? Because, for instance, Bitcoin,
yeah.
right? Once you've got quantum computing, you're not too far away from breaking that encryption.
In all fairness, typical SHA encryptions is something that you can find with any system. The fact that Bitcoin is
Sure.
decentralized puts a little more under the spotlight. But yeah, you're 100% right.
And well, and I'm not trying to pick on it. I just was, thinking that as an example. And for instance, right now, the Chinese are harvesting all our encrypted communications, even though they can't read it, because they are counting on the day that when they do have quantum supremacy and they can crack the pretty good encryption that we have, that they'll be able to read all our mail and know all our secrets from the past, right? So,
Yeah.
wow, that's planning ahead.
Some people's garbage is another person's treasure. We're by collecting encrypted junk. And once quantum computers come along, we're going to put it through this machine and it's going to gobble up all this junk and it's going to spit out information that can be extremely sensitive.
But I think the challenge is going to be, does it advance faster than we can adapt and keep up? And
Mm,
I think you're right. And one of your fears is that if you marry quantum computing with AI, I don't know where that would head so rapidly. I'm not worried about the Terminator so much as I am the benign neglector, that we just become irrelevant, right?
mm.
In terms of anything like that. But when it comes
Well,
to quantum encryption, though, I'm more fascinated by the theory. And I go back to the Wheeler, many worlds interpretation of how do these quantum computers really work? Are we tapping into parallel universes and all these other things? That's the science fiction writer in me coming out, right?
yeah. What's your philosophical interpretation of quantum mechanics? And it sounds like you're a many worlds guy.
I'm afraid I come down on Copenhagen,
Mm,
although the many worlds is by far more interesting than the Copenhagen.
yeah.
I would love to go back to the Solvay conference, forgotten what year, 1923, something like that, when you had all the great physicists of the 20th century, all the way from Marie Curie to Albert Einstein and all the people in between there. And I would love to have heard their discussions and deliberations when
Yeah.
they came up with what we call today the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. That would have been awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Picking on the conversation of wave function collapse, because I think that's what you were insinuating when you were talking about quantum computers for just a moment. How do you reconcile that philosophically, that the act of observation takes this probabilistic distribution and collapses it to a specific experience?
I don't reconcile it philosophically. I accept that the math works because when
Mm,
I try to reconcile it philosophically, I can't. I have no idea what that means because I'm so firmly ingrained in the macroscopic of my everyday experience
yeah.
that this notion that there is not an objective reality that's happening without us observing it in a certain way, I find disturbing, and therefore it's
Yeah.
difficult for me to really comprehend that. It just seems like, yeah, it seems like it's happening, but that can't possibly really be happening. But it is happening. So just give me the math tool to explain it.
It could almost be futile or irrelevant to try to reconcile it philosophically. And it sounds like you're taking the perspective that's called shut up and calculate, where I don't care about how it is philosophically, I just care about the math.
Well, but I do want to say I do care. I just don't know that I burn a lot of brain power trying to figure it out. It's fun to speculate about, but it's not something I'm going to devote a lot of energy to thinking about.
Fair enough. Yes. On that note, how can people get in touch with you, Les?
Well, I have a website, lesjohnsonauthor.com. I'm also on a lot of social media sites, usually with the handle lesauthor. And I also like hearing from people, and I can be reached at my email, which is les.johnson at rocketship.com. So
That's
I'd
awesome.
love to hear from folks, and I hope they check out my books.
Thank you, Les. It's been an honest pleasure picking your brain for 45 minutes. You're a wealth of knowledge, and thank you for your time and wisdom.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for listening to me rant.